The snow began before sunset, drifting gently across the hills like scattered feathers, but by nightfall it had become a furious white tempest that swallowed roads, fences, and forests alike. The wind shrieked through the mountain pass with such force that ancient pines bent beneath its wrath, their branches shedding heavy curtains of snow. Lanterns disappeared into the storm after only a few yards, and even the stars abandoned the sky behind thick, restless clouds. It was the kind of winter night people remembered for decades, the sort that convinced sensible travelers to remain beside warm fireplaces until dawn. Yet a single carriage pressed stubbornly through the blizzard. Its polished wheels rattled over frozen ruts as four exhausted horses strained against the rising drifts. Inside sat Duke Nathaniel Ashcombe, 35 years old, clean-shaven, broad-shouldered, and wrapped in a dark wool traveling coat that had once belonged to his late father. Though respected throughout the county for his fairness and quiet strength, grief had settled over him like permanent winter. Since losing his wife 2 years earlier, he had devoted every waking hour to protecting the only treasures she had left behind. Across from him, nestled beneath thick blankets, slept his 6-year-old twin daughters. Charlotte's cheeks glowed an unhealthy crimson despite the freezing air leaking through the carriage seams. Every few minutes she stirred, her breathing shallow with fever. Beside her, Lily remained curled against her sister, clutching a small rag doll with one worn button eye. Even asleep, the twins instinctively reached for one another, as though each feared waking alone in a world already changed by loss. Nathaniel gently adjusted Charlotte's blanket before placing the back of his hand against her forehead. The heat frightened him more than the storm outside. "We're nearly home," he whispered, though he doubted anyone could hear him over the howling wind. The carriage had departed a Christmas gathering much later than intended. Friends had urged him to remain until morning, warning that the mountain road would soon become impassable. He had smiled politely but refused. Charlotte needed rest, familiar medicine, and her own bed. Every mile delayed felt like a risk he could not afford. Outside, the coachman leaned forward, urging the horses onward through the swirling white darkness. Visibility had shrunk to only a few yards. Snow erased every landmark, leaving only the narrow road winding along cliffs and frozen ravines. Then came the sound. A sharp crack beneath iron horseshoes. The lead horse stepped onto a sheet of black ice hidden beneath fresh powder. Its legs flew sideways. The terrified animal screamed. The second horse slammed into it before the entire team lurched violently to one side. Leather harnesses snapped tight. The carriage skidded across the icy road, wheels refusing to obey. "Nathaniel!" the coachman shouted instinctively. The Duke threw himself over the twins. The carriage smashed through the wooden roadside barrier with an explosion of splintering timber. For one endless heartbeat they hung suspended above the snowy slope. Then gravity claimed them. Wood groaned. Glass shattered. The carriage rolled once, twice, before crashing into a frozen ditch at the bottom of the embankment. Silence followed. Only the storm remained. Nathaniel opened his eyes beneath shattered wood and scattered luggage. Pain burned across his shoulder where part of the carriage frame pinned him. Blood trickled from a cut above his brow, freezing almost immediately in the bitter air. Charlotte. No answer. Lily? A tiny whimper reached him. Relief flooded through him so fiercely it nearly stole his breath. Ignoring the agony in his shoulder, he forced broken timber aside until he reached the girls. Miraculously, both remained alive beneath layers of blankets thrown over them during the crash. Charlotte still burned with fever. Lily slowly opened sleepy eyes before shivering violently. "Papa," she murmured, barely awake. "I'm cold." "I know, sweetheart." He wrapped his torn cloak around both children before crawling through the broken carriage door into waist-deep snow. Nearby, the coachman lay unconscious against a pine tree, breathing but unmoving. One horse remained trapped beneath shattered harnesses, while another had already disappeared into the blizzard, its frantic neighs fading into darkness. Nathaniel understood the terrible truth almost instantly. No one knew where they had crashed. By morning, the storm would bury every trace. He could wait beside the wreckage and watch his daughters freeze, or he could gamble everything searching for help. He lifted Charlotte into one arm despite the throbbing pain in his shoulder. Lily clung weakly to his neck as he carried her with the other. Each step through the snow felt heavier than the last. The wind clawed at his face until tears froze upon his lashes. His boots sank deep into fresh drifts. Broken branches reached from the darkness like skeletal hands, snagging his ruined cloak. Every breath scorched his lungs with icy fire. Still he walked. Charlotte moaned softly against his chest. Lily buried her face beneath his chin. After what felt like hours, Nathaniel stumbled onto a narrow forest trail nearly hidden beneath snow. His legs trembled with exhaustion. His vision blurred. Then, through the endless white darkness, he saw it. Far ahead. A single golden lantern. Tiny. Steady. Impossible. Hope flared where despair had nearly won. Summoning the last strength he possessed, Nathaniel followed the distant light until a weathered cabin emerged among snow-covered pines. Smoke drifted from its chimney. Warm amber light glowed behind frosted windows. He climbed the wooden steps with failing legs and struck the door once before nearly collapsing. The door opened. A young woman stood holding an oil lantern, her dark hair loosely braided, her simple wool dress dusted with flour, surprise widening gentle hazel eyes as she took in the desperate stranger before her. Nathaniel could barely remain standing. Snow clung to his eyelashes. Blood stained his sleeve. Both little girls lay silent in his exhausted arms. His voice broke into a whisper that sounded almost carried away by the storm itself. Please, take my daughters just for tonight. The young woman looked first at the feverish child, then at the trembling sister, and finally into the weary eyes of the father who had carried them through death itself. Something softened within her expression as she stepped aside and lifted the lantern higher. Only if you stay too, she whispered. Morning arrived without sunrise. Thick clouds smothered the sky, and snow continued falling so heavily that the cabin seemed wrapped inside a world made entirely of white silence. Nathaniel awoke in a sturdy wooden chair beside the fireplace, stiff from sleep, only to discover someone had draped a patched wool blanket over his shoulders during the night. Across the room, Charlotte rested peacefully beneath quilts while Lily slept with one small hand wrapped around Eliza's fingers, refusing to let go even in dreams. Eliza gently tested Charlotte's forehead before smiling with quiet relief. The fever is easing, she whispered. She carried a kettle from the hearth and poured steaming herbal tea into a simple clay cup, adding crushed willow bark and fragrant mountain herbs gathered during warmer seasons. Nathaniel accepted it gratefully, surprised that something so humble could chase away the cold more effectively than the finest comforts at Ashcombe Hall. Outside, the wind battered the cabin walls like restless waves striking cliffs. After checking the doorway, Eliza returned carrying grim news. The narrow bridge leading toward the village had collapsed beneath drifting snow sometime during the night. Even if the storm stopped immediately, no wagon could cross until repairs were made. They were completely isolated, perhaps for days. Nathaniel instinctively apologized for burdening her home. You brought children, Eliza answered simply. That changes everything. There was no trace of resentment in her voice, only calm certainty that kindness required no negotiation. Those words lingered in Nathaniel's thoughts long after breakfast. The meal itself was modest but nourishing. Eliza stirred vegetable soup inside a black iron pot, filling the cabin with comforting aromas of carrots, onions, barley, and fresh rosemary. She baked coarse bread beside the fire while the twins slowly regained their appetites. Watching Charlotte finish an entire bowl brought visible relief to Nathaniel's tired face. For the first time since the accident, he allowed himself to believe his daughters would recover. Afterward, Eliza knelt beside the girls and carefully removed their damp stockings. She warmed smooth river stones beside the hearth before wrapping them in cloth and placing them beneath thick blankets to keep tiny feet warm throughout the day. She brushed tangles from their long hair with patient strokes until sleepy curls framed smiling faces once more. The twins responded to her gentle confidence almost immediately. Charlotte offered shy smiles. Lily asked endless questions. Eliza answered every one with patient amusement. Nathaniel found himself watching less as a duke judging another's actions and more as a father witnessing something precious he thought had vanished forever. Unable to remain idle, he insisted on helping despite the ache in his injured shoulder. Eliza handed him an axe without ceremony, pointing toward stacked logs outside the cabin. Used to issuing orders rather than performing chores, Nathaniel attacked the first block of wood awkwardly. The axe glanced sideways, burying itself harmlessly in the snow instead of the log. Lily burst into delighted laughter through the window. Charlotte giggled so hard she nearly spilled her tea. Even Eliza struggled to hide her smile. Nathaniel laughed at himself as well, a sound unfamiliar enough that it startled him. By afternoon he had found his rhythm, splitting enough firewood to last several days. Though his gloves became soaked and his muscles protested every swing, satisfaction replaced embarrassment. When he carried the final armful indoors, Eliza thanked him with sincere appreciation rather than polite courtesy, making the simple task feel unexpectedly meaningful. The following morning the snowfall softened, though the roads remained impassable. The cabin settled into an easy rhythm shared by necessity rather than obligation. Nathaniel fetched water from the frozen well while Eliza prepared breakfast. Together they repaired a loose shutter rattling in the wind. Conversation remained sparse, yet silence between them gradually became comfortable instead of uncertain. The girls transformed every ordinary moment into adventure. They kneaded bread dough with flour-covered hands until little white fingerprints decorated the kitchen table. They shaped crooked biscuits resembling rabbits and stars. Eliza baked every imperfect creation without criticism. When warm loaves emerged from the oven, the cabin filled with laughter sweeter than any Christmas carol. Later they ventured outdoors bundled beneath scarves and knitted mittens. Fresh snow reached nearly to Charlotte's knees, making every step an expedition. Lily surprised Nathaniel with the first snowball, striking his shoulder before squealing behind Eliza for protection. Within moments a playful battle erupted across the clearing. Nathaniel pretended dramatic defeat. Charlotte crowned a tiny snowman with pine needles. Lily insisted the snowman needed eyebrows. Eliza laughed so freely that the sound echoed through the silent forest, bright as bells carried on winter air. That evening they carried lanterns into the surrounding woods after the snowfall finally eased. Moonlight shimmered across untouched drifts, turning every branch into silver lace. Rabbits darted between snow-covered bushes while distant owls called softly through towering pines. The twins walked between Nathaniel and Eliza, each holding one of their hands without noticing the quiet intimacy of the gesture. Returning to the cabin, Nathaniel's attention settled upon a wooden shelf he had overlooked before. Small knitted mittens rested beside carefully carved toy animals. Cloth dolls sat arranged around tiny storybooks whose pages showed signs of being read countless times. A little rocking horse occupied one corner near a child-sized chair. The room carried unmistakable traces of children. Yet no children lived there. "You sew these yourself?" he asked gently. Eliza nodded while folding blankets. "And the toys? I made those too. They're beautiful." She thanked him quietly, but her eyes drifted toward the fire before he could ask another question. The mystery lingered. Long after the twins had fallen asleep, Nathaniel watched Eliza mend Charlotte's torn sleeve beneath the glow of an oil lamp. Every careful stitch reflected extraordinary patience. He wondered why a woman living alone had filled her home with reminders of childhood instead of trying to escape them. The answer never came. Instead, as Charlotte stirred in her sleep, she smiled faintly and whispered one sleepy sentence that made both adults look toward her at once. "I like Miss Snow." Eliza froze with the needle still between her fingers, while Nathaniel realized his daughters had already begun giving their lonely rescuer a place inside their hearts. Outside, the broken bridge remained buried beneath drifting snow, and somewhere beyond the endless forest the world waited. But inside the little cabin, something far more difficult than survival had quietly begun. When the mountain bridge was finally repaired and the snowplows carved a narrow path through the drifts, the carriage sent from Ashcombe Hall arrived outside Eliza's cabin. Nathaniel thanked her with quiet sincerity, offering generous payment for everything she had done, but she accepted only enough to replace the food and medicine she had used for Charlotte. Before climbing into the carriage, the twins threw their arms around her so tightly that even the waiting footmen turned away to hide their smiles. Lily whispered, "Goodbye, Miss Snow," while Charlotte promised they would never forget her. Eliza simply waved until the carriage disappeared beyond the pines, believing that would be the last time their paths crossed. Back at Ashcombe Hall, life resumed its familiar rhythm, yet nothing felt quite the same. The vast estate remained elegant, with soaring stone walls, polished oak staircases, glittering chandeliers and roaring fireplaces, but warmth seemed strangely absent despite every luxury. Nathaniel found himself pausing whenever he passed the nursery, expecting to hear laughter echoing from the corridor. Instead, the twins often sat quietly by the window overlooking the snowy gardens, watching flakes drift across the frozen lawns with thoughtful expressions. Every evening Charlotte asked whether Miss Snow was safe in her little cabin. Every evening Lily wondered whether she had enough firewood. Nathaniel answered patiently, though each question reminded him that gratitude alone had not repaid the woman who had restored joy to his daughters during the darkest days of winter. Without telling their father, the twins began writing short letters with the help of their governess. Their childish handwriting wandered crookedly across the pages, thanking Eliza for the soup, the stories, the snowmen, and the warm stones beneath the blankets. They addressed every envelope simply to Miss Snow, the little cabin by the pines. The village postmaster knew exactly where to deliver them. Weeks later, a neatly folded reply arrived. Eliza thanked the girls for remembering her and enclosed 2 tiny embroidered snowflakes stitched from white thread. Charlotte immediately fastened hers onto her favorite ribbon. Lily tucked hers inside the rag doll she still carried everywhere. Nathaniel watched their delight in silence before realizing they had exchanged more than one letter. "You invited her, didn't you?" he asked gently. The twins looked at each other before nodding together. "We wanted her to see Christmas at our home," Charlotte admitted. Nathaniel should have corrected them for arranging such matters without permission, yet he remembered the lonely cabin standing against the endless forest. Instead, he wrote his own letter, inviting Eliza to Ashcombe Hall not as a servant, but as an honored guest whose kindness had become part of their family's story. To his quiet relief, she accepted. Her arrival transformed the estate in ways no expensive decoration ever had. She entered wearing a modest blue wool dress beneath a simple cloak, carrying only one small suitcase and a basket filled with homemade biscuits. Rather than admiring marble statues or gilded ceilings, she complimented the gardeners for protecting winter roses and thanked the stable hands before greeting the housekeeper by name. Within hours she knew every servant's face, treating each with the same gentle respect she had shown the Duke himself. The twins scarcely left her side. They showed her every room, every hidden staircase, every favorite tree overlooking the frozen lake. Their laughter drifted through the corridors so often that several elderly servants remarked they had not heard the house sound so alive since the Duchess had passed away. Eliza never tried to replace those memories. She simply made room beside them. One snowy afternoon she accompanied the girls to the Christmas market in the nearby town. Horse-drawn carriages rolled along streets lined with evergreen garlands and glowing lanterns. Bakers displayed fragrant pies, ginger biscuits, and steaming cider while musicians played cheerful carols beside the fountain. Charlotte insisted on buying ribbons for the kitchen maids, while Lily secretly chose a pair of knitted gloves for the elderly gardener whose hands always trembled in winter. Eliza praised their generosity far more than the gifts themselves, and Nathaniel quietly noticed how naturally compassion seemed to grow wherever she walked. The following morning the frozen estate lake became a mirror beneath pale winter sunlight. The twins persuaded Nathaniel to join them on the ice, though he protested he had not skated in years. Eliza glided carefully beside the girls, encouraging each uncertain step until Charlotte found her balance. Lily slipped once, laughing before either adult could worry. Nathaniel reached for Eliza's hand to steady himself after nearly falling, and for one suspended heartbeat neither hurried to let go. When they finally separated, both pretended to admire the snowy hills instead of meeting each other's eyes. Days flowed together with quiet beauty. Eliza helped decorate the towering Christmas tree using dried oranges, ribbons, handmade ornaments, and delicate paper stars crafted with the twins. She listened patiently during their piano lessons, applauding every imperfect melody. Evenings ended in the great library, where candlelight flickered across leather-bound books as she read adventure tales aloud while Charlotte rested against one shoulder and Lily against the other. Nathaniel often remained nearby long after the story ended, unwilling to disturb the peace-filling rooms that had once echoed only with silence. Not everyone welcomed the change. Visiting ladies whispered that a village seamstress seemed remarkably comfortable inside a duke's household. A few assumed she had been hired as another companion for the children. Eliza heard every careless remark yet answered each with graceful courtesy, refusing to defend herself against judgments that revealed more about others than about her. Nathaniel noticed everything. He also noticed how his daughters instinctively reached for Eliza whenever they were frightened, excited, or simply happy. Watching them together awakened emotions he had buried beneath duty and grief. For the first time since the terrible night on the mountain road, he wondered whether fate had carried more than a broken carriage through the blizzard. As Christmas festivities approached and invitations arrived for the county's grand holiday gala, he realized the greatest uncertainty awaiting him was no longer the opinion of society, but the quiet possibility that his guarded heart had already begun choosing a home of its own. Snow settled softly across Ashcombe Hall, covering its gardens with quiet beauty, yet beneath the peaceful landscape unseen tensions slowly gathered. Christmas preparations filled every corridor with evergreen garlands, polished silver, and candlelight, but whispers traveled just as quickly as laughter. Guests noticed how naturally the twins remained beside Eliza, and many wondered why a village seamstress seemed to occupy such an honored place within the Duke's household. Nathaniel ignored every curious glance, though he sensed society measuring every interaction with careful eyes. One frosty morning he entered the library searching for a forgotten account book and found Charlotte and Lily listening as Eliza repaired a worn picture book with tiny, precise stitches. She spoke gently about courage, kindness, and choosing hope when fear seemed easier. The girls listened with complete trust, hanging upon every word. Nathaniel realized she never entertained children merely to distract them. She quietly taught them how to become compassionate people. Watching from the doorway, he felt both gratitude and growing curiosity. Later that afternoon, while searching for extra wool blankets requested by the housekeeper, Nathaniel entered a small storage room beside the servants' corridor. There he discovered several baskets neatly packed with handmade mittens, scarves, children's coats, loaves of bread, jars of preserves, wooden toys, and carefully wrapped medicines. Each bundle carried only a small stitched snowflake instead of a name. He frowned with confusion. When Eliza stepped into the room carrying folded linens, she froze for the briefest moment before recovering her calm expression. "I was hoping to move those tonight," she admitted quietly. "Move them where?" "To families who need them." Nathaniel studied the carefully prepared supplies. "Every basket is different. Because every family is different." She spoke without pride, as though describing ordinary household chores rather than remarkable generosity. That evening curiosity overcame restraint. Nathaniel followed at a respectful distance as Eliza quietly left Ashcombe Hall carrying one of the baskets beneath her cloak. Fresh snow muffled every footstep while moonlight silvered the sleeping village. Instead of visiting friends or attending celebrations, she stopped outside a tiny cottage where smoke barely rose from the chimney. She placed the basket beside the door, knocked once, and disappeared behind a hedge before anyone answered. The astonished Duke watched a widowed mother open the door moments later. Tears immediately filled the woman's eyes. "My children," she whispered toward the sky. "The winter angel remembered us again." Nathaniel remained hidden while several children rushed outside laughing over the unexpected gifts. None knew who had brought them. The following night he followed again. This time Eliza visited an elderly couple whose roof leaked beneath melting snow. Another evening she left blankets outside a shepherd's hut. On Christmas Eve she quietly delivered boots to 3 orphan brothers living with their aging grandfather. No one ever saw her. No one ever thanked her. The county spoke endlessly of the mysterious winter angel, believing the benefactor impossible to identify. Nathaniel finally understood. The miracle had lived beneath his own roof. When he gently confronted her after returning home, she did not deny the truth. "I never wanted anyone to know," she said. "Why?" She looked toward the fire before answering. "Because kindness becomes smaller when it expects applause." Silence settled between them until Nathaniel softly asked the question that had lingered since the cabin. "The toys, the mittens, the little chairs. Who were they for?" Pain flickered across her gentle features. "Years ago I was engaged to a schoolmaster named Thomas." She smiled faintly at the memory. "We planned a tiny wedding just after Christmas." Her voice grew quieter. "But an epidemic swept through the valley. He spent every day caring for sick families." Nathaniel already sensed the ending. "He never came home." She folded trembling hands together. "Afterward I volunteered at St. Agnes Orphanage because I couldn't bear sitting alone with my grief." Her eyes glistened in the firelight. One winter night a lantern overturned. Nathaniel's heart tightened. The building burned before help arrived. She closed her eyes. "I survived." The next words barely escaped as whispers. Many children didn't. Nathaniel reached for her hand without thinking. She did not pull away. "I couldn't save them," she murmured. "So every winter I try to save someone else." No title. No recognition. No audience. Only quiet acts of mercy offered in memory of those she had lost. Nathaniel understood then why children instinctively trusted her. She had carried sorrow without allowing it to harden into bitterness. Word soon spread that Ashcombe Hall would host the county's grand Christmas ball. Nobles, magistrates, merchants, and neighboring families gathered beneath glittering chandeliers while musicians filled the ballroom with graceful waltzes. Eliza attended only because Charlotte and Lily begged her to come. She wore a simple emerald gown she had sewn herself, elegant through craftsmanship rather than extravagance. Among the guests stood Lady Beatrice Winthrop, wealthy, beautiful, and determined to become the next Duchess of Ashcombe. She quickly noticed the affection shared between Eliza and the twins, interpreting kindness as dangerous competition. During supper, Lady Beatrice approached with a polished smile. "My dear," she said loudly enough for nearby nobles to hear, "it's refreshing to see servants dressed so confidently these days." Conversation around them faltered. Eliza answered calmly, "I am not offended." Lady Beatrice's smile sharpened. "You should remember your place." Before Eliza could respond, Charlotte rose from her chair. "She isn't our servant." Every voice in the ballroom fell silent. Lily stood beside her sister, chin lifted with remarkable courage. She's the only person who makes this house feel warm. The stillness that followed seemed deeper than snowfall. Nathaniel looked across the room at Eliza, whose eyes shimmered with restrained emotion, then toward the astonished guests who suddenly understood almost nothing about the quiet woman they had dismissed. In that unforgettable silence, another servant hurried through the ballroom doors carrying frightening news from the nearby village, and every heart turned toward the messenger before a single word had been spoken. The ballroom doors flew open with enough force to silence every whispered conversation. Snow swirled inside on a burst of icy wind as the estate's head groom stumbled across the polished floor, his face pale with alarm. He removed his hat only long enough to catch his breath before looking directly toward the Duke. "Your Grace," he said hoarsely, "a village boy has gone missing. He wandered from his family's cottage before sunset. They've searched for hours, but the storm has erased every trail." The orchestra fell silent. Outside, another blizzard had begun to rage, fiercer than the one that had changed all their lives weeks before. Nathaniel's expression hardened instantly. "Gather every lantern, every horse, and every able rider." Before another order could be given, Eliza had already slipped toward the entrance. He caught her wrist gently. "The forest is too dangerous." She met his eyes without fear. "So is leaving a frightened child alone in it." For a heartbeat neither spoke. Nathaniel recognized the same determination he had seen on the night she opened her cabin door without hesitation. He released her hand. "Then we ride together." Within minutes, Ashcombe Hall erupted into purposeful motion. Stable hands saddled horses while servants filled packs with blankets, ropes, dry clothing, and hot broth. Lanterns flickered against the swirling darkness as volunteers from neighboring farms arrived one after another despite the weather. Word spread quickly throughout the county. The Duke himself was leading the search. Nathaniel rode beside Eliza through the blinding snowfall, Charlotte's red scarf tied around her neck beneath a heavy cloak. The familiar sight stirred something within him. Weeks earlier he had carried 2 frightened daughters through another storm, believing hope existed only as a distant lantern. Tonight that same hope rode beside him. The forest had become nearly unrecognizable. Snow buried every path. Branches groaned beneath heavy ice. The wind carried voices in strange directions, making every shouted name seem farther away than it truly was. "Thomas," riders called. "Thomas." Only the storm answered. Hours passed. Several search parties returned empty-handed. One horse lost its footing crossing a frozen stream, forcing its rider to continue on foot. Lantern flames flickered violently in the wind until many extinguished altogether. Eliza suddenly raised her hand. "Wait." Everyone stopped. Nathaniel listened carefully. Nothing. Then, faintly, almost hidden beneath the roar of the storm, a child was crying. She turned immediately toward the sound. "It's coming from the river." The frozen river wound through a steep ravine where snowdrifts concealed dangerous drops beneath smooth white blankets. Nathaniel urged everyone to proceed carefully. The cries grew louder. Finally they saw him. A little boy no older than 7 clung desperately to the roots of an overturned tree at the edge of the riverbank. One boot had slipped into freezing water while thin ice cracked beneath him each time he struggled. The terrified child looked up. "Please?" The ice splintered again. Nathaniel threw himself from his horse before anyone could stop him. "Rope?" A stable hand tossed one immediately. Nathaniel secured it around his waist while 3 men anchored the other end around an ancient pine. "I'm going down." "The ice won't hold," someone shouted. "It doesn't have to." Without another word he slid carefully down the icy bank toward the child. Each movement sent fresh cracks racing beneath the frozen surface. Above them, Eliza knelt at the river's edge. She did not call instructions. She spoke only to the frightened boy. "Look at me." The child obeyed through trembling tears. "You're very brave." "I can't move." "You don't have to." Her voice remained astonishingly calm. "The Duke is coming." Nathaniel reached the child just as another section of ice collapsed into the rushing water. He seized the boy beneath both arms, shielding him against his chest. "Pull." The men above strained together. The rope tightened. For one terrifying moment Nathaniel lost his footing, plunging knee-deep into the freezing river. The current slammed against his legs with brutal force. Eliza immediately slid closer despite shouted warnings. Stretching as far as she could without falling herself, she grasped Nathaniel's outstretched arm. "You won't lose him," she whispered. Those simple words carried more strength than any command. The men pulled harder. Slowly, painfully. They climbed back onto solid ground. The instant they reached safety, Eliza wrapped the child inside thick blankets before pressing warm hands against his freezing cheeks. "You're safe now." The little boy burst into sobs. So did his mother when she arrived moments later, collapsing beside her son before embracing him with desperate gratitude. The villagers surrounded Nathaniel and Eliza with tearful relief, but neither accepted praise. Their attention remained entirely upon the rescued child, ensuring he could drink warm broth and regain feeling in his hands. As dawn finally painted the eastern sky pale silver, the exhausted search party returned to Ashcombe Hall. News of the rescue spread faster than the storm itself. By afternoon every village knew the Duke had risked his life for a shepherd's son. Yet an even greater story quietly traveled from cottage to cottage. People discovered that the mysterious winter angel had ridden beside him all night. The secret could no longer remain hidden. Families came carrying knitted scarves Eliza had once left anonymously. Children arrived holding wooden toys she had carved. An elderly widow brought the empty basket that had appeared outside her door 3 winters earlier. None came seeking favors. They came simply to say thank you. Nathaniel watched quietly from the great hall as one grateful family after another embraced the woman who had spent years believing kindness should remain unseen. Only then did he fully understand. She had never tried to earn love. She had simply given it away until it quietly returned. Christmas morning arrived beneath clear blue skies. Fresh snow sparkled across the gardens while church bells echoed through the valley. Inside Ashcombe Hall, servants prepared breakfast as laughter drifted from the drawing room. Nathaniel paused before the fireplace. 4 stockings hung from the mantel. Charlotte's, Lily's, his own, and one embroidered with delicate white snowflakes. He smiled. "There are only 3 of us." Charlotte looked up with complete certainty. "There were." Lily grinned. "We're waiting." Nathaniel turned slowly toward the front windows. Outside, Eliza stood near the waiting carriage, her small suitcase resting beside her feet. She believed Christmas was over and her place within their lives had ended. Without another thought, he hurried outside. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he crossed the courtyard. She looked surprised to see him. "I didn't want to leave without thanking you." "You already have." "No," she answered softly. "You gave me something I thought I'd lost." "And what was that?" "A family, even if only for a little while." She reached for her suitcase. Nathaniel gently took it from her. "I once stood outside another home during a blizzard." She smiled through gathering tears. "You asked me to shelter your daughters." "I did. And I told you to stay too." He nodded. "You saved far more than our lives that night." Slowly, before astonished servants watching from distant windows, Nathaniel lowered himself onto one knee in the fresh snow. Not before kings. Not before nobles. Not before society. Only before the woman who had opened a simple wooden door without asking his name. "I asked you to shelter my daughters for one night." His voice trembled with honesty rather than ceremony. "Would you stay for the rest of our lives?" For several silent heartbeats, only snowflakes moved between them. Then Eliza's tears escaped despite her smile. "I thought you'd never ask." Before Nathaniel could rise, 2 joyful voices shattered the quiet. "Mama." Charlotte and Lily raced across the snow as fast as little legs could carry them, throwing themselves into Eliza's embrace. She laughed through tears while holding them close, no longer afraid to love them with her whole heart. Nathaniel wrapped his arms around all 3, completing the circle that fate had begun in the lonely cabin. Several weeks later, they returned together to that same little cabin nestled among the snow-covered pines. Nothing had changed, yet everything had. The lantern still glowed warmly beside the weathered door. Smoke still curled from the chimney. Snow still blanketed the silent forest. But this time no frightened father stood alone in the darkness. Instead, Nathaniel, Eliza, Charlotte, and Lily walked side by side toward the welcoming light, leaving 4 clear sets of footprints stretching across the untouched snow. Behind them, the faithful horse followed at an easy pace, while laughter replaced the desperate silence that had once haunted the woods. The storm that had begun as a night of fear had become the first chapter of a family chosen not by blood, title, or circumstance, but by courage, compassion, and a promise made beneath falling snow that would endure for every winter still to come.